Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen and members of the public. It is now 2 o'clock. Before we start, I'd just like to read out a short statement regarding our beloved Queen. It was with great sadness that on Thursday last week we learned of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Our thoughts and condolences are with the King Charles III and members of the royal family at this sad and challenging time. Queen Elizabeth's dedication to our country and to the Crown will go down in the history books, and her commitment to a life of service is an example to us all. She will be long remembered, and we are thankful for all she has done for us as our longest-serving monarch. As a mark of respect, I invite you to join me for a minute's silence. I am obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Item number 1 are apologies. Julia Buckley has apologised, and Councillor Ted Clark is substituting. Steve Charmley can't come today, so Roy Allcroft is substituting for him. David Phasma is not going to be here, and David may join remotely, but does not count as being present and will not be able to vote. Any participation is at the discretion of the chair. Does anybody have any disclosable interests? No? Okay. Minutes from the last meeting. Can I just say at this juncture that the whole of Democratic Services have been extremely busy over the last week, and Amanda and her team and Miranda have worked extremely long hours. So as a committee, I would like to write to them or email them and say thank you very much for all that they've done for us. And because of that, unfortunately, we haven't got the minutes from the last meeting, which hopefully everyone will understand. So, item number 4 is public questions, and at this particular time there were none submitted. Member questions, we haven't got any member questions. So item number 6 is the Financial Monitoring Report, Quarter 1, which is from 22-23 to 25-26. So James will be presenting, and Ben Jay, who's the Assistant Director of Finance, will be in attendance. So I believe Ben Jay is the bottom right. That's right. At the screen. Good afternoon. So
good afternoon.
Hand over to James. We've got Gwilym here as well, which is good. So thank you very much indeed, Gwilym, for making the effort to attend.
So thank you, Chair, if I may. Yeah, so this is the Quarter 1 monitoring report. I'm going to hand over to Ben to take us through this. So for those of you that haven't yet met Ben, he's our new Deputy Section 151, so the Assistant Director for Finance and Technology. So he is taking a much closer working relationship with finance and the finance team and the monitoring and the budget, etc., than I am. So therefore you get the benefit of his knowledge and experience and closer to the information than I am at the moment. So if you're comfortable with that, Chair, I'll hand over to Ben, who will take you briefly through the report.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that you can hear me okay in the room?
Yeah, I can hear you brilliantly, thank you. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. In which case, thank you, Chair. I'll just take the committee quickly through the report, which is, you can see the agenda item 6, it's the Financial Monitoring Report Q1. The key point here is obviously that this is the first report of the year. Excuse me. It's the key point, the first report of the year. And in the way that these things often happen, the first report of the year can be somewhat alarming, can we put it that way? The first report of the year tends to flush through a lot of the issues, the challenges, which will then be tackled through the remainder of the year. But obviously, being the first report, we haven't had the opportunity to identify all of the mitigations, all of the interventions which could be necessary as we go through the course of the year. So the first report can often be quite difficult. We would expect, I'm working with colleagues, other officers, to ensure that as we go into the Q2 report, there is an improved position for the council. Having said that, and as the report sets out in the executive summary, the council does continue to face significant uncertainty. So internally, we know that there's that pattern of the first report of the year can be a little bit alarming, and later reports see an increasing level of financial management being exerted and various interventions coming through. But we know that externally, the broader national and indeed regional and international context continues to be quite uncertain. It's a point I've made in a couple of other settings, but it's worth bearing in mind. The Shropshire Council set its budget for the current year on the 24th of February. That's the same day Russian troops crossed the border into Ukraine. After precipitating some of the pressures around food, fuel and utilities and inflationary costs that we've seen, which have developed since then. So whilst we were able to prepare the budget at that time, based on our best estimate of the various things which were going to be happening this year, clearly there are some things which have subsequently developed. The budget that was prepared and put in front of Council in February clearly was a balanced budget. The inflationary pressures have pushed that somewhat out of balance. And we've then got some mitigations which have been coming through since then to bring the position back into the correct balance that we need. We also know that as we're coming into the current year, we knew locally that there was going to be some services that would be coming through which would be under pressure because there would be ongoing pressures from the pandemic, where the funding was being withdrawn. So at the end of the last financial year, that was the end of the specific funding that the council was going to receive from government. But we know that some areas, particularly social care, for example, some of those costs would continue to persist into the current year. Much of that was designed to be mitigated through the budget proposals which were agreed by council, but we are still working through some of the detail of that. So that's a further area of pressure that's coming through. In terms of the key financial values, these are set out in summary at 2.3, but also in more detail in the subsequent paragraph at 2.4, taking the committee through the control corridor position. The table at 2.4 is quite helpful in this regard. The summary is that the lower estimate of the control corridor, the realistic best case outturn, is around 4.1 million overspend at the current time. And the composition of that is largely down to the effects of inflation, which is over and above those estimates that were provided in the budget and agreed in the budget. Those effects of inflation, which we haven't yet been able to mitigate. Clearly, we know about this, and plans are in place to mitigate those. And to some extent, those have borne fruit, but there remains, we think, an unaddressed amount of about 4.1 million. So that 4.1 million realistic best case is our target outturn as at the end of July. That's what we're trying to get to. That's what we think we can get to if we all work hard around that. The current best estimate shown above that, 9.373 million, 9.4 million, thereabouts. That 9.4 million is where we currently believe that we're headed if all other things remain equal. Now, in terms of that, clearly, we want to put in place a number of mitigations that will be worked through with service colleagues across the course of the coming months. So if we can put those mitigations in place effectively, then we begin to move from the 9.4 down to the 4.1 as set out in that table. There is a situation in which the realistic worst case, should officers not be able to tackle this effectively and a number of things fall against us, there is a realistic worst case position which could be as much as £17.5 million overspend. That is based on a number of things coming falling against us, and the difficulty that officers may encounter in being able to provide effective mitigations. Having said that, some of those are externally driven and may be quite difficult for the council to influence and to manage out. Others are more internally driven, and those are the areas where we're seeking to improve that position and make sure those realistic worst case risks do not materialise. Put it that way. So the current position is quite a widespread. The similar position from last year is a much smaller spread. It was about 2.5 million up to I think just over 9 million last year. And what's really driving that widened control corridor at this point in the year is those external circumstances, as I've mentioned, the change in some of the funding arrangements, plus the national and international situations and problems that we've been encountering. That's the current clear position around revenue. There's some further detail setting out around some of the issues arising from in social care around paragraphs 2.6 and 2.7. The recommendations that I'll perhaps come back to those shortly. Those are the recommendations in that report as it was prepared at that point. It's worth noting, I think, in terms of the risk and the paragraph 4.1, we are seeing probably nationally, but certainly regionally and in the Shropshire area, we are seeing a change in the labour market. And some of this is a result of the way that people's lives have developed during and after pandemic. But what we are seeing is that there are problems securing permanent recruits into the council from a number of different sectors and a number of different service areas. But clearly, it's essential to ensure that we can get good people into Shropshire Council, because that will help us deliver on our ambitions for us as a council and for our residents and for our local businesses. But clearly at the moment, it is, if I can put it this way, very much an employees market. This is something which is different to some of the market forces that we've seen in the past, but clearly employees are much more able to move around and much more able to secure alternative positions for themselves depending on what their own life circumstances are and what they're looking for. The task for the council will be to make sure we are as attractive an employer as possible. In terms of other points in the report, the detail of the projected revenue outturn is set out at section 8. There's some further comments around income and savings delivery. Income is at 9, and section 10 sets out savings delivery. The current total is that about half of what we're tackling within the year it looks to be green. In other words, it's deliverable or delivered. There are some concerns, particularly around a couple of particular areas that we're working through at the moment. Just under 7 million ambers, but there are also, somewhat worryingly, some total red badged savings just under 5 million there, which is set out in the table in table 2. And there are some changes to the way in which the local market is working and some previously identified savings in the place directorate, which we believed at the time of setting the budget would be deliverable. And it's increasingly clear that we will struggle to deliver fully against those, although we have delivered partially against them. So there's a review there which is needed and will be in hand in due course to make sure that we plan for that appropriately. And the last point I wanted to draw the committee's attention to is around the reserves and the table, particularly at paragraph 11.3. The budget for the balance of the general fund, which was brought into the year at the 1st of April, is, as set out in the table, just over 11.5 million. The budget agreed by council in February planned for the contribution of 4 million into that, which would take the resulting balance up to just over 15.5 million. So the general fund overall balance planned for in this year is 15.5 million. That's a reasonable sum of money by any stretch of the imagination. But in the context of an organisation where we are spending 600 million gross, just over 200 million net, particularly in the context of the uncertainty which I flagged at the outset in the report, 15.5 million is, in my experience, to the lower end of what a council of this size might seek to have as a general fund balance. If the projected outturn, the reasonable sort of mid case that was set out at the front of the report, 9.373 million overspend, were that to transpire, that would need to be funded from the balance in the general fund, which would therefore be reduced down to just over 6 million. If 15.5 million is at the lower end of what might be suitable for a council of this size, and actually a higher balance would be prudent given the uncertainty that we face. So obviously, a £6.2 million balance, that would not be an acceptable level, a safe level for the council to be running with. And it's in that context, particularly, that urgent work is being undertaken by officers to ensure that there are mitigations put in place in the coming months to manage down that 9.4 million as much as possible, to target the 4.1 million that was set out in the initial table, and if possible, to improve upon that 4.1 million. I think that's probably the key issues which I wanted to raise with the committee in terms of taking you quickly through the headlines in the report. I'm very happy to take further questions, Chair, on the remainder of the report if that's what members would like to do.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask a question, and actually I'd like to ask a question to Gwilym as well, because he may have a different take on it, because I know Cabinet have been writing to government quite a bit. So, obviously, there's help on the way from the government with electric bills. Now, usually large authorities like us have a long-term contract at a fixed price. So, are we in a long-term fixed contract or not? How much help do you think we're going to get, and how long is it going to take? So, you may have different views, so I'd like to hear from both of you, if that's okay. Do you want to go first, Benji?
Very, very happy to lead on that one. In terms of the simple position, yes, through West Mercia Energy, we currently have a fixed price contract, which was set some time ago and helps us to be maintaining a position which is lower than many of the current rates, certainly in the domestic market. So that helps. And in terms of some of the benefits that government have recently announced, my understanding is that we will probably be slightly below the threshold for qualification for that support, which in some ways is unfortunate, but probably overall is a good thing. The key issue for us, I think, going forward will be that in the event that the utilities prices overall don't decrease across the medium term, then as we come out of that fixed term contract, there will clearly be a budget pressure to be faced. At this point, it's probably almost impossible to quantify that, but it would be sensible to recognise that risk at this point. So I think that's the simple factual position on that, but I'm happy to pass across to Gwilym if he has further comments.
Yeah, just before I finish though, Benji, so when does this contract expire? And the council has a lot of properties all over the place. Are they all in the same pot? James is going to come in now.
If I come in on this, because I'm still the treasurer for West Mercia Energy.
Right. Okay. So you've got the inside track.
Probably a little bit closer. So the way that the contract works is we have a contract for the council on corporate, which is all of our administrative buildings. We have one for street lighting. We have one for schools, although the schools aren't ours, they pay for that themselves. And then there's another for any of the small elements to it. And then you have all the outsourced kind of businesses and whatever that used to be part of Shropshire Council. The street lighting contract is on a fixed term contract. In terms of the administrative buildings, what tends to happen is we forward buy so that we know what the price is, and it's fixed, but there's a cap. So it will never exceed more than 5% of the level that's in there. So what we're seeing is that for this year, because it was a lot of the electricity and gas was bought last year before the prices went up, we've seen an increase, but not as great. As we then go in, we've already, at this point in time, I think we already bought 60% of next year's and 25% of the year after. So we're already forward buying, so that we're trying to manage that situation constantly throughout that position. So all of our businesses, our business locations, our administrative buildings, the message is use as little gas and electricity as possible. Obviously, the winter period is the bit that makes the difference, because that's where the prices can vary significantly. But we don't have the risks that a lot of other organisations have got, because we own WME along with Telford, Hereford and Worcester. We get the benefits of kind of seeing this in advance. Other authorities that have come out of contract are now going into a new one, are just having to buy at the rate that the market is at, which is hundreds of percent increases.
So just as a bit of a side issue really, so the schools are covered for this year as well, which will be a great relief to them.
Yeah, so they'll have seen increases, but not the levels that we're talking about here. Okay. And again, the year after. But with schools, they can opt out of the contract for the following year, so there's only a 12 months notice.
Yeah.
We've seen some opt out over the last few years. I'd be expecting to see less opt out at the moment.
Yeah, hopping back in. Okay. All right. Have you finished, Benji, or do you want Willem to come in next?
I'm quite happy to pass to Willem.
He's passed you the baton, Willem.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make some general comments, if I may. By starting off, when we actually formulated this budget back in the last winter, none of us would have expected inflation to peak at around 10%. And we would have to be looking at giving, pay awards of in excess of 5 to 6% for our staff moving forward. I think I could also say that if inflation had stayed at where we thought it may have stayed, sort of 2, 3, 4%, I could cautiously say we would probably have been on budget now. And so it is very much uncharted waters. However, I'm very confident that we're putting the right things in place to actually ride this storm. Also, taking into account, I strongly believe that obviously there's a delay due to the sad death of our Queen, but government are going to have to do something for inflationary pressures for local authorities, especially around the pay, and also further support in respect of how we fund our social care. And also all of that has obviously been delayed, but I'll be interested to see when we get the emergency autumn statement to see what relief there may be for us. But I'm cautiously at this stage, Chair, not putting any of that into our forward programme. So irrespective of whether the government gives us anything, we will deliver on this. So and if they do give us something, it will be, put us in a slightly better position. Interesting enough, working with the officers, looking at other councils, because sometimes it's easy for us to look at ourselves in isolation. I think we are in quite a stronger position than a lot of other authorities in the fact that we're slightly ahead of the game on this. And don't know what Ben and James may say on that, in the fact that we know where we're going, so to speak, and we are in a control and command situation. So overall, the quarter one report is very, very similar to quarter one last year. We managed to turn that around last year with a slight overspend, which was more than covered by the surplus in the collection account. So at this stage, I would hope by the time you get the quarter two report, the narrative may change in support from local government. And that is a hope. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. And then by quarter three, we may see some of that coming forward. The only thing that I would probably put on the radar of the committee is there's probably going to be inflationary pressures running into the next financial year. And so what is the government going to do with our cap on council tax at 1.99%? So I think we need to be minded of that. And along with all these pressures, we commissioned care homes. It's not just about our fuel costs. If they don't get any fuel cost care, or if they fall out of the regime, the pressures that will be put on us if we get services handed back to us. And those are all the sort of things we need to be aware of and ready for. There is a big piece of work cross-party for us to engage with our MPs, so they really get to feel and understand the pressures to their local authority and the fact that how we think they should be resolved. But on top of that, Chair, I'm quite confident we're on the ball with this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham. So, open it up. Who else wants? Joyce?
Yeah. Just a quick question. Given the financial position in the country, are we expecting non-payment of council tax to any great degree, and will that impact on this?
Happy to respond to that, Chair. I think it's unclear at this stage quite how local households will be impacted by the financial situation at the moment, but we would expect there to be some impact. It's not clear yet whether or not that will be material or not within the within the budget that we've got. What we are doing is looking at the numbers of accounts, particularly for council tax, which are in arrears. And it's a fairly easy number to pull out of the system and to watch closely to see how and if that's changing. At the present time, we're not seeing that, but then we're not expecting that that would necessarily play through immediately. We're expecting that that could have played through. That was before the government's announcements around restoring the cap on consumer utility bills. But I think at that point we were expecting that could be the number of accounts in arrears could be increasing as we went through the autumn and into the winter. We will continue to look at that, but at the moment we're not seeing it. So I wouldn't say that we are expecting it, but we're anticipating it could be an issue, and we'll be managing that as we go through.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could I just comment, please, Chair?
Yeah, of course you can, Gwilym, yeah.
Just an observation, really. It was very interesting during the COVID pandemic when people were furloughed on 80% of their income. We did not see an overall fall in the collection rate of council tax, but people had 20% less income. The argument could be there, Joyce, that they've now got 20% less disposable income. Will they still pay their council tax? So, again, uncharted waters.
Yeah. Can I come back?
Yeah.
It's a matter of interest. I know in my area of Morda, leaflets have been stuck to gateposts and all sorts. And I've been told it's an anarchist group saying, don't pay. They don't say what you don't pay, but telling people not to pay bills. But anyway, I reported it for fly posting. Thanks.
Right. Okay. So I've got Chris Schofield and then I've got Roger.
Well, I just wanted to ask what Ben deems to be a safe reserves. Is it very vague? Is it 3 months worth running of the council, or is it 6 months? Or
the simple answer to that is that it's always a judgment, and it's usually a judgment particularly reserved to the Section 151 officer, and it's set out in several legislation relating to the budget setting. Different councils will take different approaches to that. Some of that is through force of circumstances, whether they've had a largely beneficial history and they've got a good reserves position, or perhaps have had a more adverse history and they've got a more adverse position in terms of their reserves. And there isn't a specific guideline on it. It's a question which often comes up. The guidance generally is that the level of the reserve which is held should be proportionate to the risks that the council is facing. And that's a combination of the internal risks, the ability to deliver on its existing financial plans, and the ability to do that sustainably into the future, but also the external risks as well. I think the comment I offered around 15.5 million is at the lower end of what could be achieved. My previous council was Barnet Council in London, a very different council in many respects to Shropshire, but with a not dissimilar sort of budget position. Net budget was slightly over 300 million, so somewhat bigger in that respect than Barnet, but in other respects quite a similar sort of authority. And their general fund balance was at 30 million. I would see 30 million as being probably at the higher end of what a council could afford or should afford. Certainly it was sort of regarded as being more than adequate from the Barnet perspective, and they were quite relaxed about that position. And so in the context of Barnet having 30 million and ourselves targeting 15.5 million, I think that's my insight around it. But obviously that's something that I've been discussing also with James and with Gwilym and others. There is no clear guideline. We do it in relation to the risks that we believe we face.
oh, thank you, Ben.
Okay. And you're satisfied with the answer, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Got a number of questions, but of course on energy, there are huge tranches in Shropshire who are not on the gas grid, and they have to buy oil. I know oil has come down in price, but there's no cap on that. So where that goes in the future, there are huge numbers in Shropshire who are at risk because of it. And I do note in the report the good news in LED lighting eventually coming through, and there's a saving now being made on that, which it had been done a few years ago. but okay, we are where we are. However, my questions are on the report that's in front of us, and also the report that was made in July. And just so that I can fully understand it, in July there was reference about an £8.3 million overspend predicted because of inflation. Is that included in this report, or has that already been taken out? So all the overspend in this report is new and on top of the 8.3, which has been handled, as I understand it, or is that included in this best estimate and the upper and lower levels that are there? And then I've got another couple of questions.
Okay,
Chairman.
we'll take them one at a time, Roger.
Yeah.
And give Gwynn the opportunity as well. He might want to say something.
Just to take you through that position, and you quite correctly identified that £8.3 million pressure that was identified in for the March-April period, based on the emerging pressures that we could see around pay and non-pay inflation. And the majority of that 8.3 was around pay inflation, but there was also some identified around potential pressures in utilities and also in other contractual and sort of supply chain inflation. The estimates that were made at the time were fairly broad brush, and it was obviously quite difficult to see. But to some extent, the results through month 4 have indicated that those early estimates were not exactly correct, but probably very much in the correct ballpark. And in terms of the relationship between that position and the current position, the expectation in the July MTFS paper was that 8.3 million, there were mitigations that had been identified but were not yet in place, we believe, for the full amount. So we were able to move from a balanced budget in February, an £8.3 million pressure subsequently identified largely around inflation, and then mitigations which will bring that back down largely to balance. And what we're identifying as being the target level of outturn at 4.1 million is effectively the 8.3 plus as many of the mitigations as we believe we're able to put in place effectively at this point in time. So the 8.3 is being reduced down largely to the 4.1 within the report you have in front of you. The 9.4 figure is effectively taking into account a wider understanding of the current pressures within the council. So it's a kind of inflation plus, if I can put it that way. But the two reports are consistent. They do work from the same basis. There is not a separate amount to be added on in either of the reports.
Do you want to say anything, Willem?
Yes, just to answer Roger's issue regarding the people who rely on oil for their heating and water, etc. I was at the social task and finish group that's been set up to deal with such issues this morning, where the question was raised, and quite rightly, my twin-hatted ward in the south of the county has no gas whatsoever. So it really affects my constituents as much as anybody else's. What is coming out from central government is that irrespective of how you heat your property, the cap will be the same. But how they actually deliver the support for those on oil or LPG gas or solid fuel, the details haven't come out, but they will be coming out in due course. And naturally, as soon as we get that information, we'll get it out through members to ensure that their constituents are able to apply for the support. Thank you.
Gwynn, can I just ask you a question? So, just as some people, have to have their oil delivered, there's quite a lot of people around by me who aren't on the gas mains who actually have gas delivered. So they're in the same boat, aren't they? Yeah. Sorry, you've gone on mute then.
Sorry, basically what the government says, however you do it, you'll be capped at the £2,500.
Yeah, okay.
But how they deliver that, I don't know at this stage.
Oh, okay, thank you, Gwynn. Roger, next one.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome from the government, because residents are having to fill their oil tanks now, and it's all on the spot prices. However, the next question is to do with Shire services. I note in the report that it's predicted Shire services will have an overspend of £546,000. There was a report which went through Cabinet earlier this year, which I thought put extra costs on schools, and the expectation was that Shire services would break even during this current financial year. If that is correct, can I be assured, the members here be assured, that the costs being passed on for schools will not increase again? Thank you, Chairman, for that one.
Chair, if I may, I think there's some further detail I'd need to respond adequately to that question. So rather than risk getting some of the detail wrong for councillors, and if I could take that question away and get some further detail on that would be appreciated.
Okay, that sounds fair enough. So do you want to say anything, Glenn?
Yeah, just to update slightly, and I totally agree with Ben. I think there needs to be the devil's in the detail, and we need to get under the skin of that. I think at the last count, there's only 39 schools now who take Shire services. Quite a few have moved away. So, you know, they've obviously found a better deal in the market, so to speak. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Okay, thank you, Gwyneth. Right.
So you, Chairman, information will be circulated to members then, I assume. Next question is the Shrewsbury shopping centres. If I read this correctly, the Darwin Centre and the work being done on the Pride Hill Riverside Centre adds up to just over £1 million in this budget, which would be costing the council. Is that correct? That's £505,000 in commercial, and then there's another sum further back which also mentions it together, which together adds up to £1,044,000. Is that correct?
It is correct in terms of the arithmetic, but I think we should be cautious in terms of aggregating two numbers which are actually representing two quite different things. I'd be happy to expand on that if the committee would like me to.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. So there's, as the councillor correctly identifies, there's the commercial line and then there's the development line for shopping centres. The development line for shopping centres identifies a £500,000 expenditure budget, and the forecast is that we will stay pretty close to that, and there's effort being put in place to ensure that that will remain largely as it is. The cost there is to do with the fact that those areas are part of a wider redevelopment, so they're not actually working as shopping centres at the present time. So that's part of a wider redevelopment plan, and as part of that redevelopment, there is a certain amount of financial investment, both capital and revenue, going in. And part of the consequence of that is the cost budget, the net expenditure budget of £500,000, which is set out in the report, and that's being delivered largely to plan at this point, and we don't believe that will move significantly away from that. So that's a development piece. The other piece, which I think precedes it slightly in the report, which is around commercial, that's to do with, I'll get this the right way around, it's the Darwin Shopping Centre. There's some narrative in the report for councillors there. What that's identifying is that the general analysis, which is being put forward more broadly in the retail sector, is that shopping centres will perform better where they are able to secure a higher level of occupancy. So if we can make sure that there are no empty sites within Darwin, and then that it remains then as a more attractive shopping venue, retail venue for consumers. So the general approach is to say, let's try and maximise the level of occupancy within the centre. In order to do that in the current economic circumstances, the managing agent for the shopping centre has advised that actually it would be beneficial to work with those retailers that are in the site and to recognise some of the pressures that they're under, and thereby identify how some benefits could be afforded to them or some costs could be reduced to maximise the first priority, to maximise the occupancy. This is an unbudgeted pressure which came through. So the overall position was expected to be broadly a surplus position for the shopping centres at the point of preparing the budget. As we've identified already earlier on in the report, there are a number of pressures, inflationary pressures, not affecting the retail sector as much as any other sector of the economy. So in order to try and preserve the ongoing sustainability of the shopping centre, what we've agreed to do, based on the advice from the managing agent, is to accept some additional costs in the short term in order to ensure that the overall sustainability of the shopping centre is protected in the longer term.
Right, thank you. Do you want to say anything, Gwyneth? You're on mute.
Sorry, just an observation that I think it's nationally renowned that how Shrewsbury has come back from the pandemic from a retail point of view, and I think it's our policy of getting the Darwin full has been a big part of that. And I'd challenge every member to go to other major retail parks to see the issues that they've got. And the experience in Shrewsbury far outweighs a lot of places. So I think our policy has helped the bounce back from COVID for the high street in Shrewsbury.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Roger,
Right.
got one more question?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Yep.
I understand that, and yet footfall, it's important to keep up because we want to support retailers outside the Darwin Centre as well as in it. But originally, when it was bought, we should have been expecting a £2.5 million income from the shopping centres. However, to move on, my last question is to do with capital, and that is that I notice that in the Appendix 7, in the proposed capital programme, there's a reference there about the North West Relief Road, and it says there that the planning decision, which is anticipated in September 2022, which is this month, and also the final business case, currently estimated for June 2023. Are those dates still current and correct, or are we now looking at a delayed planning application and decision, and we members, scrutiny committees, have not seen any business case for the North West Relief Road, and the capital that may be needed if the government do not increase their capital grant to the council could well cause it to be looked at. So it's the business case. We're not going to see that by this report until June next year, but the planning application, it says anticipated decision September, which is this month. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. Okay. I don't know if you're going to answer that one. I don't know if you should pass it to James or.
I can't.
Go on then.
So Daniel Webb, European Scrutiny Officer. Coincidentally, I've just literally asked the planning officer this question, just remotely while we were talking about it, and the response has been that September deadline is unlikely, but I think the answer was more like autumn. So I think it's going to be it's unlikely to be September, but it won't be that far out from what I've been told.
So what Daniel is saying is that the planning application will be heard this autumn, possibly October.
Through you, Chairman,
yeah.
There has to be at least a 6-week or a 13-week consultation, whether it's a minor alternate, but if it's a major planning application, when a consultation comes out, there's a 13-week turnaround. So 13 weeks is 4 months, 3 months. So yeah. But we haven't seen it yet, but yeah, and there are others on the planning committee which would know more than I do, but not for this application. I would have thought it's going to be a 13-week turnaround from when it is actually validated.
Indeed. I mean, I think they would have to refer back to the planning officers, but that September 22 is we're not likely to meet that deadline. I know that much.
Okay, so Gwilym's got his light on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to comment on Roger's comments, really. The delay is somewhat out of our control because it's been caused by third-party consultees, to which we've been waiting responses. I would hopeful that the application would come through in the autumn. In respect of the business case, as I said at Cabinet last week, we have a new government, we have a new cabinet, and we have to reopen our engagement with them. I know infrastructure they are very keen about, and we will certainly be putting a strong case forward for their support with our North West Relief Road and how they fund it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Do we have any more questions? Alan.
It's obviously a very discouraging report. Obviously, there's massive risks for the viability of the council. When we have a new government that seems intent on reducing taxes and probably reducing public expenditure. However, we are in year, as it were. But Ben did, I think, mention that there was expectations about additional funding coming from government, and particularly mentioned additional money for social care. Could you just comment on what the word is in the sector about any relief I understand why the inflation is happening, but can you explain within the sector what the word is about potential government support and alleviation of these massive difficulties?
Happy to comment on that, Chair. The simple position, I think, from most of my colleagues in the sector, and I'd be obviously happy to defer to any comments that James or Gwilym may wish to add, but the simple position, I think, is that while we all can see the need for support into the sector, the track record, not just for a newly formed cabinet, but the track record over many years recently, is that it's unclear as to whether that will materialise for local government and how and when, and there could be all sorts of other things to be taken into account, including the ways in which money is shared out. And so there could be a big national number, but locally for Shropshire, it might not be quite as much of a benefit. We don't know. What we do know is that certainly for this year and planning for next year, we are still only partway through the year. So there is every opportunity, however difficult it might be, there is every opportunity to seek to gain control as much as possible of the situation that faces us and to work with what we've got. Then if there is further funding which comes through, then that will be a benefit, and we'll be able to identify how best to deploy that funding. There is some talk as to how this might play through, but I think, again, echoing some of Gwilym's remarks, we are still very much in the early days of the new national government, the new nationally formed cabinet, and clearly the impact of the unfortunate death of the Queen is slowing down some of those processes as that new cabinet gets underway. We will be able to update councillors in due course, but for now, I think we are working very much within the resources which we know we have and seeking to control our own position as much as we can.
Okay, is there anything you would like to add, Gwilym, or?
Yeah, just briefly, if I may, Chair. Our Director of People, Tanya, is constantly working with the sector and the organisations of sector. And obviously this isn't just about the care homes, it's also about the delivery of domiciliary care. And it boils down to everything like mileage rates, you know, and the simple things. Plus, as Ben mentioned earlier, the employment market. You know, why would you enter into domiciliary care when you can get £4 an hour more working for Aldi? And these are all pressures that we are having to explain to government, and then they need to understand how they're going to support us. Otherwise, it's going to become a very expensive time for social care. So, and that's not an arena we want to get into. So we're working as hard as we can with the sector in Shropshire, but also using that information to lobby our MPs for the best outcome we can hope for from Westminster.
Okay, thank you, Gwilym. Have you got any more questions, Alan? No. Roger wanted to ask, and I presume it's on the same sort of topic as Alan.
No, it's about capital receipts, but
okay, carry on.
But yeah, if I can, and it's a fairly short one. I think I know what the answer is, but I see on the council agenda there are some exempt reports. I'm not referring to them more than that, but in this paper, in the projected capital receipts, it makes a note that of which 1.603 million relates to the sale of small holdings. Is that confirmed that we are going to do that, or is that a projected and an estimate? I'm trying to be careful how I actually phrase it.
James, do you want to take that one?
All the report is referring to is that in a previous calculation of capital receipts, there was an allocation that was built in around small holdings as well as other capital receipts, and so based on those early assumptions, that is still a figure. So that figure's been reported for quite some time as a value that's in the accounts for this. It makes no reference or bearing on what actual capital receipts would come from those particular areas.
Thank you.
Okay. And if you want to ask anything else, I'll suggest you do that. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Gwilym. Thank you, Benjay. I'm going to move the recommendations that basically we note this report. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah, I'll second.
Yeah. Yep, Joyce. Yep. Show of hands. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye, Gwilym. Take care. So.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Okay. Item number 7 is the performance monitoring report, quarter 1. So we've got Steve here. He's going to present the report. And we've also got Rob here as well. Thank you very much, Rob. Looks like he's sat in the countryside there. Is that the view from your window, is it?
No, I'm afraid not. It's just a screen. It's just a screen saver, Chair.
Right, okay, right then. Steve, if you'd like to talk to us briefly about the report.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So this is the quarter 1 corporate performance report. The report comes in 3 parts. So you've got the cabinet report, which is very much a high-level report, which says how many measures have been updated, a bit of background, and highlights of good performance or concerns. The appendix is the measures which have been updated. So those are all the measures and gives you the latest performance and a little bit of commentary. And the performance portal, which is online, gives you the trend views. It gives you far more sort of performance commentary and updates. So the 3 need to be used in conjunction with one another to get the full picture. The quarter 1 report is the first report against the Shropshire plan, and it's still it's evolving as a report and will change as we go forward. Hopefully you've all read and seen the appendix, and you'll see that there's more deliverables in there. So what we're trying to do is start to move more forward looking to say these are the things which are coming forward, not just within this year, but could be a few years hence. It's so we can track how things that we do and implement, how it actually affects performance. As we go forward, there'll be more measures coming in. At the moment, I appreciate that the total number of measures is quite light, but I'm starting to work with all the service areas to bring forward more measures that reflect the ambitions of the council, and we'll give you more detail. That'll also be more target driven as well, so you'll start to see more targets appearing, and it won't be just targets for the current year. I'm going to try to move that so it's more forward looking again, so you can sort of see the journey that we're going to go on. So that's a sort of background to it. In terms of the report this year, as you can, for this quarter, you'll see that it's broken down into the 4 strategic objectives: healthy people, healthy environment, healthy economy, and healthy organisation. The key deliverables are there. We'll start seeing things like delivering the inequalities plan. There'll be the residential hub, things like that are starting to come forward, and we'll start to track how ours progress. In terms of the actual report itself, I suppose the main area of concern is the delay in the homelessness strategy. The service is very keen to emphasise that they are working hard day to day with people and supporting their needs, but they have been under a lot of pressure with, first of all, lockdown and all the implications of that, and Ukraine refugees unfortunately having to come to safety. So that's sort of delayed it, but they have got a plan in place now, and we should be getting the temporary accommodation strategy coming out this month, which feeds into that thing. So there is work occurring in the background, but it's not where we'd like that to be. The other, I suppose, key pressure is looked after children. In some respects, this is good news this quarter for the first time. The numbers are still increasing, but the rate of increases has slowed a lot recently. However, word of caution is we are having to take in more unaccompanied asylum seeker children, so the numbers again could start increasing. Some good news on looked after children front though. The Stepping Stones programme which started last year, is meeting its target and is starting to have an impact on getting children to step down and their care needs, and also preventing some children actually entering the care system. Not in this report, but again, because of time, we've updated things like visitor numbers to theatre and that, and the recovery on that is quite good. So those are the main sort of elements of the report. I'm happy to take questions about the report, and I will try my best to answer on behalf of any service areas.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I got confused, I think, the last time you came, because of course part of this is in the Shropshire Plan, but the Shropshire Plan actually comes under Gwilym, doesn't it, Rob?
Yes, the Shropshire Plan comes under Gwilym, but the performance reporting comes through myself.
Yeah, and so because what we were going to do was have a little group to try and increase some of the performance reports that would feed into the Shropshire Plan. So, given where we are with the Shropshire Plan, do you think we're at a point where we could actually have a little informal group where we could work with yourself and Gwilym?
Most definitely, yes. I mean, I just sort of like to point out that, you know, a lot of the KPIs and targets that are on there, looking at it, are sort of can be seen to be quite corporately based. You know, and don't get me wrong, it does mean a lot to the to Shropshire Council as a whole, but we just got to make sure that these KPIs are targets that are also aligned to our residents as well. So, for example, if you're a resident, you know, you might want to know, well, how is the council doing in, say, filling in potholes, or how is the council doing in delivering of superfast broadband, or the collection of waste, or, you know, dog muck, that sort of kind of thing, really. So I think we've got to make sure as well that these things link to the Shropshire Plan, which is really important, but we've also got to make sure that they are relevant to residents as well. Yeah.
Well, I agree, and the point I made before was they have to be relevant to councillors as well. So I'm well, I'll see what everyone else has to say. Rob.
I suppose from my point of view, it's we keep getting the reports about the Shropshire Plan's coming, and they're going to have the targets, and they're going to filter down into how staff are managed, etc., etc. I'm just wondering, do you have a time scale? Because sort of Steve's saying he's going to start meeting with the heads of services and so on. It's just kind of, it feels like something that's so complex, it's got the danger of running for years and years and years, and we can't analyse the performance we're going to look at. So it was just trying to get a gauge.
Yeah, and I think the Shropshire Plan is going to be launched fairly soon, isn't it, Rob?
Yes, I believe so. And you know, obviously that's when that's launched. You know, that obviously is a really good opportunity for us to really put our stamp on what the sort of things, what sort of targets and KPIs that councillors want to look at, and that's a really good thing for performance management as a scrutiny committee to take a look at as well. And like you said, Chair, that, you know, quite happy to form a small group to look at those things.
Yeah, okay.
But can I just ask, is there a sort of a laid out time, or is that something we could ask for as the performance management, to say we would like to see it in place by this?
Yeah.
Just so that we can start thinking about, when we're working, what are we holding to account, when can we do it?
So Shropshire Plan agreed in May, so that's now in place. So until that was in place, we couldn't do a performance management framework around that, obvious reasons. The plan was always that for the first quarter performance report, we would start to have some of the indicators that would demonstrate that the delivery of the Shropshire Plan was going to happen, was happening. Ultimately, and it will take more of the quarters over this year and possibly into next year, there'll be a suite of indicators whereby you as a scrutiny committee will be enabled to gain the assurance that the Shropshire Plan is being delivered. So there's part of the performance management framework, which is very much about making sure that those overarching objectives for the authority are being delivered. That's why there's a separation in terms of Rob and Gwilym, because Gwilym is setting the policy overall, whereas Rob is sitting to look at the performance management framework. That performance management framework, however, doesn't have to only be restricted to the Shropshire Plan. So some of the indicators that Rob was talking about, sorry, I've just realised there's two Robs, that Rob on the screen was talking about, so some of the specific indicators may not be specific to delivering an outcome in the Shropshire Plan. However, they may be very important for the organisation, for members, or for the public to understand where the organisation is in terms of the things that they can see on the ground and contribute partly towards the Shropshire Plan, but not directly. So the plan would be for members, group, to get together and have a look at those indicators that you think are important. Now, some of those may already be within the framework that will go into the Shropshire Plan, which is great. If they're not, though, that doesn't mean we can't do that. It means we can build those up. So in terms of timescales, the timescale for the Shropshire Plan indicators is going to be the rest of this year, but I think we'll probably go into the first quarter of 23-24 as well before we get a complete summary of that. Bear in mind that the Shropshire Plan is a living document, so it will be being reiterated, reconsidered, refreshed, and therefore the performance management framework will follow that. In terms of the indicators that members want to see specifically, we can build a timescale around that. I think if we get some dates in the diary to meet and discuss that, identifying the indicators can be done fairly quickly. Building up the data that would enable those indicators to be delivered may take longer, but until we know what those indicators are, we can't give a timescale around that. Does that help?
It helps in part. I think that's my thing I'm trying to get to. Are we going to say at the start of the next financial year, that's when we would expect to have the Shropshire Plan in place with the relevant indicators? That's how we would judge that bit. I'm just conscious that some of it was supposed to trickle down to staff as well, and how their performance and so on. So I was just conscious, was there an internal date of like the new financial year or something like that?
I think I did miss one point out. When I said at the start the Shropshire Plan was approved in May, there is now an official launch which is happening next month, which will then be the start of that process to ensure that golden thread flows through the organisation. At the same time, in late October, we're launching the Leadership Development Programme, and that will include a number of things. Within it will be included, however, a new appraisal process. Within that appraisal process will be built in a performance management system around indicators on an individual basis that link back to the Shropshire Plan, and indicators on a team basis. So it's not just responsible for your own position, it's actually responsible within the team. That's not just for team leaders, that's people within the team. How do you contribute to making sure that those team performance indicators are being delivered, which themselves report back up to the Shropshire Plan. So that's all being launched in October, and that will take, I think it's 4 months of implementation. So you're into the start of 23-24 before you're going to start seeing anything realistic coming from that. But all of that is in play.
So if we agreed to set up a bit of a meeting with Tom Dodds and Gwilym and Rob and Steve, and ask members, if they want to come along, and we can thrash out some indicators that we'd like to see on there.
Absolutely.
And I think if we just ask everyone to come along, and we had it actually here in person, or people would join online if they wanted, and have a big whiteboard or something, and we can just get an idea of all the indicators we want on the board or something, because this room would be ideal, really, I think. And if we ran it as like a bit of a drop-in session, so that we had it, I don't know, maybe half a day or something, so that we get hopefully the majority of members in to put their ideas down on the board and see how we go from there.
I think that could be an indicator.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just conscious that timeline then fits in with
Yeah.
where the rest of it is going, so it's.
And I've been keen because I did have a meeting with Rob and we were discussing something like this and then it didn't happen. So is everyone happy with that idea? Because then it's open to everybody and
Definitely.
is everyone happy with that? Yeah. So we can take that as a recommendation that we'll set up a date for some sort of day or morning session for all members with the four of you. If I can leave that for Rob and Steve, if you'd like to organise that with Gwilym and Tom. Is that?
If I can, Chair, if we draw up a scope for that,
Yeah.
to give an indication, how would this be facilitated, how would this work, what would that look like on the
Yeah.
We'll work that with you, we'll agree that with you.
Yeah, okay. And then
As
we'll
Chair, and then we can put something out more formally.
Yeah, and we can send it out to everybody, and then everyone can, will have the opportunity to say what's important to them in their particular area. And we're not going to guarantee that we're going to have everybody's performance indicators up there, but there will be a common theme, I'm sure. I'm sure there will be at least a dozen that pretty much everyone identifies with. So have you got any more questions? Yeah. Oh, Alan first, and then Roger.
I'm just a bit confused about the whole overarching concepts involved in this, because some of the performances are measured over a series of years in the past, and you can see what's happened in that sense. Some of them are measured on just a very short-term thing. Some of them aren't actual performance themselves. They are producing reports like homelessness or crematorium in Shrewsbury, that sort of thing. And of course, we're achieving that because papers are being written, but it doesn't say anything about the actual work on the ground and what difference that is, those sort of things are making. I'm just looking now at the previous report, which considers looked after children, and it quoted the numbers of looked after children from April 20 to April 22. And that's a disaster area, really, in terms of the numbers, and I can remember talking about this before. It's a disaster not only comparing ourselves going backwards, but also comparing ourselves with other similar local authorities. But here we've got some performance here related to stepping stones, and it shows that we've got a target of 5 up to from March 23, and we've achieved 4. That's out of a total of 630 or whatever, and this seems to be a success story, but is it a success story or not? I would want to know, the question that needs to be asked is how long it's going to take to have any significant differences on children's lives and family activities in the short and the longer term before I came to any conclusion about whether that performance was acceptable or not. Certainly, if you look at it in terms of the large figures I mentioned, our looked after children policies hitherto have been a disaster. So, what sort of timescales are we looking, and how are the things that are going into each of these performance monitoring sessions being selected? I don't see consistency.
Okay.
Don't see consistency from one meeting to the next. And I think there might be some cherry picking going on. Certainly looking at the headline figures of 13 improvements, only 1 going down, that would seem to be wonderful performance by the council. But of course we all know from our own personal experiences that it's not like that at all in the real world.
And I understand your frustrations, which is why I think we need to have the morning or the day session at it, because it's very early doors for all this, and in fairness they've only picked a few indicators, and that's what we've said all along. They aren't necessarily indicators that we want. But the other question you raised about looked after children, and I agree with you on that, but I think as a performance committee, we if we have those indicators, then once we have those indicators, then we should pass them to the appropriate scrutiny committee to actually look at it in more depth. So it's being able to have the tools, and these performance indicators will be the tools to actually look in more detail at areas of concern. That's what I'd say. So I don't think you can quite wrap the two up together. James?
If I can just come in on that and to pick on some of those specific points. Cherry picking, I wouldn't say that's exactly the right term, but there's an element of we can only pick the cherries that we can reach, if that's a good analogy. At the moment, we don't have a full set. We don't have a full set of indicators, and part of the reason we don't have a full set of indicators is because the service plans that flow from the Shropshire Plan, which flow from the strategic objectives within those, are still being created. So what we've tried to do from a performance point of view is to identify those indicators that we have available that give us an overarching indication of where the Shropshire Plan is and where it's going. So number one, there'll be more to flow as we understand what needs to be measured, because we need to understand what the service plans look like at a more detailed level. There's another point within that is in relation to, I think you talked about like strategies or documents being delivered. This is part of the basically the milestones process. So you're absolutely right. Delivering a homelessness strategy, for example, doesn't actually tell you anything other than a document has been produced. However, until that document has been produced, you can't then identify or consider or manage or measure the indicators that would flow from that. You have to have that in place, first of all, to demonstrate what the strategy is. So you can say, if the strategy is we're going to build 24 temporary accommodation buildings deal with homelessness, then that would become an indicator. But that may not be what we intend to do. There may be something completely different as part of that. So to be fair to the officers that pull this together, it's very much a case of identifying those milestones, and you can only start from where you are. So number one is get a strategy in place, and actually that's an area that has not been delivered, which is a concern. But when that's in place, the next step will then be, okay, so what indicators flow from that give us an indication that the homelessness strategy is being delivered, which in itself is an indication of the healthy people priority within the Shropshire Plan objectives.
Right. So I've got Roger and then I've got Chris. Are you content with that answer, Alan, or do you want to come back?
Well, yeah, I mean, just usually in the example that James just used, I mean, we need data on homelessness must be there, and we need that data to inform us about whether or not we should tell somebody to develop a strategy.
So, if I may, Chair, so if you talk about numbers of homeless people, then yes, we do have information in relation to that, absolutely. But how we decide to tackle that, and it's all about outcomes for people. I can answer from a financial point of view. Homelessness creates a huge financial disbenefit in relation to housing benefit subsidy loss. Which is something that we have to bear. So from a financial point of view, there's a very strong indicator which would say this is what's delivering success. But that may be very, very poor outcomes for the individuals that are involved by just focusing on the financial objective. So we do need the strategy to understand what are the key objectives that we're trying to achieve, so we can then measure those.
Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I do note in the financial report that there's a housing services £740,000 overspent on temporary accommodation. So it should be a priority for the council. However, looking at the report that's before us, looked at it, and it does. I use the word. It's my personal word, and it's not the words maybe correct words. It does pose a rosy situation for Shropshire Council. I don't think it is correct, but however, I see in the healthy people part, it says a homelessness strategy, and it's being delayed. When you go into it, and have a look at it, it shows it's at 50. Now, I don't know what 50 means. It says the target is 100 by March 23. Now, I don't know what 50 or 100 actually means, and I couldn't see any definition of why it's at 50, how do we get to 100, and are we on target to do that? So that's in that part of this report, which is the healthy people, and it's a homelessness strategy. If one goes on there to go into the healthy economy, it goes there that the local plan is meeting the target. It's meeting the present target. We're over 2 years behind. And the planning inspectors visited Shropshire in July, and they're coming back in October, and they're telling us whether the plan is legal or not. It could get tossed out in October, but here it's rosy. We're on target. No delays. It also shows here on page 8 of the report, house numbers. There is number of premises on house numbers is 5.6. That's 5.6 years we've got in houses, according to this. In 2020, we had 6.05 years. To go on plan, we need 1,500 houses per year, new houses to be built. And it says it isn't available. But if one looks at the if you look at the council tax, number of premises on the council tax register, you see that it's gone up by 1,593. Now, whether that's all new houses or not, I don't know. But it's saying that the number of new houses that were built up to March 22 is not available. But the number of premises on the council tax register is. So I'm not sure why one is there and the other one isn't. So it's figures like that. If one interrogates it and goes through, you can find all sorts of things. And I am concerned that we are getting one picture there. And I pick up what Councillor Mosley said about it is the performance indicators we should be looking at, and I think this committee and the suggestion you made, we do need to look at it to see how the council is performing, because some of these indicators to me do not give a true picture of what I think the council is at. And then finally, and then I'll pass it on, is that when you look at the healthy organisation there, it's listed on page 9, number of complaints. And it shows previous performance 291, current performance 252. But if you look at the number of complaints which are referred to the Ombudsman, in 2021 it was 46. In 2022, and this is to March, it's 79, which is a little bit different picture. To there it says a direction of travel going down for the number of complaints. But the number of complaints being referred to the Ombudsman is going up quite a lot. And it's those sort of figures which don't seem to be appearing in this report. I don't know if anybody else has any comments.
So a couple of things, Roger. I know that Rob Macy's doing a lot on housing. But I think this is exactly the point I made at a few meetings ago, is that what we want from performance indicators is different than what the officers put down on a bit of paper, which is why we need the meeting. And I think we're at the ideal stage now to actually have that day and get all this done so that it is part of the Shropshire plan as well.
Through you, Chairman. Yeah, I agree. We do need to have these indicators sooner rather than later.
Indicators that we want. Rob?
I think that I suppose that's my thing. It comes back to this timetabling of if the goal is sort of start the next financial year.
Yeah.
Do we as a performance management committee, if we had an update item on our next agenda, if that meeting's held before then, we could hear back from it. But I'm also conscious, if officers are developing this and taking Roger's point, do we want one of the draft indicators or measures or something on an issue we want to look at? And do we have a go at taking that as an example and seeing how far we can drill down in the data and so on, whether we could get to where we wanted before they develop out all the rest of them, and we find actually it doesn't give the depth we want. Does that make sense?
So it's a bit like, I think it's a bit like the ICS. I think, you know, we want performance indicators, but you're absolutely right. We've got to get a few of them right, because if we go there and we ask for 50, it's not going to work. So we have to ask for a specific number. So let's have a meeting, and hopefully we can discuss it as a group, and come up with our preference on indicators, so that we can actually do something as opposed to do a lot of stuff badly. Yeah? And this particular area is clearly one we want to look at. Is that okay, Rob, Steve? Have you got any comments on that? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a few comments to go back to Roger's. I can answer Roger's questions about various things if you wish. So the first one was about why is the homelessness strategy at 50? Well, if you look, there's 100, 75 and 50. So if it was 100, it would be on track and it would be shown as green. If it was at 75, it would be as marked as an amber. And if it was 50, it would flag it as a red. So it's just the numbers that are behind it. Unfortunately, the system that we use online has got some limitations. We'll have to do a bit of a workaround to demonstrate if it is a red, amber or green. As we move away from systems and we develop things into Power BI, we'll have more control over how we display that and report back to you. So hopefully that will improve. In terms of a planning review, being marked as being on track, based on the information I've received from the officers, that the current timetable, which was going back a couple of years, it is on track against what I've been told is the timetable. Now, what it comes back in terms of review in October, November from the commission review, yes, it could be thrown out, but then we will have to look at that as a measure and revise it. The 5.6 is the land supply. So that's how much housing land is available at the moment for housing. So we have to have above 5 years. So 5.6, obviously above that, has gone down. But hopefully when the plan review does go through, that will start bringing the land forward again. The new houses, totally correct. The latest figure 22 isn't published yet. Quite simply, they have to go and do site surveys around the county. That data doesn't come through to me till at least December usually. So what I do as sort of a proxy measure to indicate what the potential new houses figure will be, I use the council tax valuation list because that is available readily. And as you said, it's increased by 1593 over the year. So that gives us an indication of, normally the figures aren't too far apart. So we should be on track for meeting the 2022 housing things. In terms of the complaints, they are two separate measures. So one is how many complaints we are receiving, and those are the numbers we get. In terms of the Ombudsman, yes, the number has increased, but we must remember in 2021, the Ombudsman didn't take complaints for, I think it was about 3 months. Because of COVID, they closed down. So naturally, the numbers are going to increase this year. So, but the figures that come through, I report them as they are. I'm trying to be open and transparent. I'm not cherry picking measures. I'm reporting what's available to me in terms of performance. I'm more than happy if anything is red, I report it as red. I don't have an axe to grind about that, so that's where it is. So hopefully that answers the questions. I look forward to working with you in terms of suggestions to take this forward, because I do want to improve the quality of information and the quality of the performance measures that are there. And we also want to provide more in-depth information to you. So I've been doing some work, and James is aware of this in the background, about bringing more detailed information to you as a committee, which will have benchmarking and will have satisfaction, so we get a better view of measures. So it's not just about a single measure, it's about all the things that sit around it. What's the cost? What's the impact on people? How do we compare to others? So look forward to working with you, and hopefully we can prove it for everybody.
Okay, so Chris has been waiting very patiently, so if you've got something really quick, Roger, and then let Chris go.
Thank you, Chair. I think your idea the excellent idea of putting key performance indicators in is really, really good. And I find it hard to scrutinise this without key performance indicators. So can I suggest that we move on to the next item, please?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going around the houses scrutinising something that you can't scrutinise.
No, I agree. Just quickly.
Yeah.
I'll indulge Roger.
Quick
one last bit.
Yeah, quick one if I can, Chairman.
Yeah.
About complaints, and I respect the figures and I respect the officer, but if one interrogates it, highways and transport complaints, the highest in the last 8 years. Education and Children's Services complaints, the highest since 2018. So, okay, 2021 might have, or 2020 because of COVID, but if you look at the last 8 years, the highways now is at the highest. Now, whether it's a combination of when Ombudsman didn't pick them up and it's all built up, I don't know, but those sort of figures, as a scrutiny committee, those are the ones that I would like to see.
Okay, right, so we've got a proposition, sorry.
Just to point out that the annual complaints report will be coming to this committee at your next meeting.
Right, okay. So what I'm going to propose as the recommendation is actually that we have a day or half a day here with Rob and Steve, Tom and Gwynn, and get some ideas about how we're going to move forward, what performance indicators we'd like to see, and then we select the top number of indicators to actually move forward on, and that we will need to discuss that with Steve and Tom, because obviously some indicators are easier to do than others. So if we're going to actually deliver on that, we'll need to do a bit of work on that. But I'm quite happy to work with everybody and invite the whole of all the members of the council to that particular day. So is everyone happy about that as a recommendation? Yeah. Show of hands, everyone happy? Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.
So, item number 8 is the Financial Strategy Task and Finish Group Terms of Reference. So, Daniel, do you want to just...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A slightly important terms of reference here for you. I think when we last proposed the terms of reference for this, there was a fairly ornate and detailed programme of work that the group would work through, starting out with some very sort of broad concepts of the budget and challenges, and then drilling down to the detail as that went on during the year. And the group promptly tossed that out the window within the first 10 minutes of this meeting as being unworkable, which is fine, because actually the work that it did do was probably more useful going forward. So what I would suggest is I think the objectives stay broadly the same, and in the context of what we've just heard now, might actually prove to be quite opposite in terms of the issues that Councillor Mosley just raised around how performance indicators translate into policy and meaningful policy that actually delivers for the people of Shropshire rather than just delivers a very narrow indicator. And I think this group is in a really good position to do that, and did that quite well last time, particularly around children's services, identifying budget pressures and the way that policy was going to deliver good policy, but also deliver within the context of the budget that was available to it. So I would propose that we do that again going forward, and I think that's a very meaningful way by which this committee can contribute.
Okay, so I think translating that a bit for some of our newer members. So the Financial Task and Finish Group essentially looks at the different service areas. So we look at adult social care, we look at children's services, and obviously we look at the financial pressures. And from those financial pressures, we will understand some of the performance indicators we need. So obviously, if we look at the financial pressures of looked after children within the Financial Task and Finish Group, there will be particular areas that we can ask for performance indicators on. Now those indicators will be the areas where we think will make the most difference, hopefully. So it's not a public meeting, it's a private meeting. People from the different groups get organised, and we have 2 or 3 hour sessions on different topics. So we can feed, and I think the minutes are available. Are the broad minutes available to this particular group, or?
What we tend to do is we tend to produce a final report which comes to the committee.
Right. Okay. So yes. So we can bring updates, but basically that will feed into what we're doing, because obviously there's key areas like looked after children that Alan mentioned, and obviously I'm very concerned about that, as is Peggy, I know. And if we can drill down and get some performance indicators that will help us to understand that, then it's going to be worthwhile. So we've put, I think, have you sent the email out to ask people if they want to join the financial task force?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Just waiting for you all to agree to.
So are you happy?
Yeah, definitely.
Are you happy about that? Yep.
Yeah.
And I think did you do it last time, Roger? Yeah, you did. Yeah. So.
Yeah. If I can, Chairman, it's that, and I note in the financial report, we get the quarter 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Directors have it monthly. It would be useful, I think, if the working group can talk to officers on a confidential basis to get the complete figures up to date, rather than look at them a quarter late. Now, it might need some looking at to see if that's possible, acceptable or not, but can I just suggest that maybe enable it to really dive in and get the present position? Because the quarter 1 report here, it goes up to the end of June. It's 3 months out of date, but it's that information. If we were doing it, we would like to see what it was in August. Now, it is a meeting not open to the public, but it will be useful when we talk to directors or whatever, if we can have the real up-to-date figures.
You go first, James, and then I was going to say something.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. So first thing, the first quarter monitor was actually based at the end of July. We pushed it back a month so that we'd have 4 months of data rather than 3 because of the time delay in producing it. Yes, reports are produced on a monthly basis, but they're not produced in the format that would enable Scrutiny Committee to review that automatically. They are management reports that enable us to then to keep an eye on the track between the quarter 1, the quarter 2, the quarter 3 that are reported through. So, in all honesty, I'm not sure what the value of those would be, given their management reports. And secondly, it would actually create work for the team to then turn them into something that could be brought along to a committee. What we could do would be to, if there are any significant changes that have come through in any particular areas since the last formally reported position, we could update on that. There's also just an element of consistency. With the best will in the world, if the Shire Services overspend turn from £500,000 overspend to a 250,000 underspend in a few, you'll be quoting that, and the official figures will be the £500,000 that was reported. So there's just something in that as well. So we can do something, but I wouldn't want to produce reports on a monthly basis or on a basis.
Yes.
I'd also suggest as well that isn't really quite the purpose of this group. I mean, what you're talking about here is financial monitoring, which we do within do it in a public environment here. This is around how policy drives finance and how finance drives policy. It's much more of a policy-based group than it is financial monitoring, and I would suggest that it would be a poor use of the group's time to simply ape what it does in this meeting already.
Yeah, and I agree. It'd be counterintuitive, because basically when we have the meetings, we need to understand what's going on. Obviously, if there are changes, that the officers will know about that. They won't be able to give you to the exact, but they will understand what's going on, and that's what we need. We need to know what's going on, so that we can put in some performance indicators to monitor those key areas of concern. I think that's the thing. So if everyone's happy with that, then Daniel can put out the call for members of the financial task and finish group. We usually get the same people doing it, the same people who are interested. I know Roger always sits on it.
Who knows which the group chooses, Chair?
I think it's down to the chairman, actually. Me, isn't it?
It is.
It's down to me who chooses it, so there you go, Roger. Okie dokie then. All right then. So can we, if I propose that, can we have a seconder for that? Yeah. Everyone happy?
Yeah.
Good. Good. Thank you. So the work programme. So we've got a few more things in our work programme, Daniel.
Yeah. Other than obviously the financial strategy task and finish groups come forward. Just for your next meeting, notwithstanding the usual financial report, which I don't think will be happening in the next meeting, there are two items that have been asked to come to the committee. The first one is around digital strategy, which has been agreed, and the second one, which is the annual complaints report, which will be coming a little later than we wanted to, but that's obviously the way that it just falls with our meetings. So those are the two substantive items that I have for the next meeting.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So when are we going to get this the task and finish group up and running? The financial one.
Well, we've agreed in terms of reference. It's just a question of me putting.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll put the call out, so we could perhaps get a meeting organised within the next.
Yeah, and I'll have a conversation with you around the. If we're going to approach this thematically, who you might want to talk to first.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it might come down to because Benal is whose diaries are free and available.
Yeah.
So which
Okay.
one we use first?
Yeah, because I think there's about 4 main areas.
There are indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much indeed for coming today, and I'll probably see you all at full council. Thank you.
Yeah.